Emotions have been the bedrock of our existence. They're responsible for some of our greatest victories, our most cherished moments of our pastime, and contributing to the humanitarian actions that have helped improve our quality of life, all which are purely driven by our innate desires, our emotions. Feelings of happiness and gratification become substituted with the greatest downfalls of humanity through the inseparable relationship between positive and negative emotions. Wars, mass genocide, terrorist attacks are also purely driven by our innate desires, our emotions. As humans, we are emotional beings by nature. In a world dominated by emotion, the contingency that you will encounter both the joys and sorrows of life is almost inevitable. In an emotional world, life will propagate the ups and downs of a relationship, the ups and downs of your favorite sports team, the ups and downs of having children, and even the ups and downs you experience emotionally in the stock market. We experience the joys of birth and the sorrows of death, the joys of making money in the stock market, and the sorrows of losing money in the stock market. These ups and downs lead us on an incessant roller coaster ride. The point I'm trying to make is that with emotions comes moments of happiness, but are also accompanied with moments of misery. Most humans, however, favor our emotional inclinations. They like to feel happy and experience pleasure. They are willing to sacrifice or risk their enjoyment of a relationship, having kids, or trading stocks because the benefits of pleasure outweigh the costs of feeling displeasure, or so they think. But others, like myself, see emotional expressions as a vexatious disease. It's a primitive quality that has been passed down from our earliest ancestors. Any emotional attachment to a living being or an object such as money can distort our logical sense of perspective. In the financial markets, the only proficient surviving members are those who possess the absence of emotion. This is one of the reasons why computers and algorithms are key players in today's markets. It's because machines lack emotion. In the financial world, it will only behave as an emotional world if the participants themselves act emotionally. And trust me when I say this, the world of penny stocks is highly emotional. So by understanding how we behave in penny stocks, this will give you a greater advantage over other penny stock traders and investors. Now, these emotions that I speak of are stimulated from a region of the brain known as the limbic system. The limbic system, also known as the paleomammalian brain, serves a variety of functions, but I'm going to focus primarily on the emotional aspect and how it inhibits our ability to make money in the financial markets. Our reptilian brain, also known as the R complex, is located near the brainstem, and it controls the dynamics of our heart and respiratory system, among other things. It is the oldest part of our modern human brain. It is our instinctual brain. Situated on top of the reptilian complex is our limbic system, the paleomammalian complex, and it behaves as our emotional brain. Now, the uppermost layer is called the neocortex, our rational brain. This structure empowers our ability to perceive music and art, language, and most importantly, logic, reason, and mathematics. I want to make it abundantly clear that in the financial markets, the only part of the brain you should really be utilizing is this upper region right here, our rational brain. Based on my own observations, it's easy to see that the volatility in the stock market is created by this region of the brain, the limbic system. You might argue that the R complex is necessary. Otherwise, if you don't eat or breathe, you won't be able to trade or invest in stocks. This may be true, but just because you can breathe does not mean you will become a successful stock trader or investor. That's where reason and logic come into play. When you make any decision, whether in the stock market or in real life based on emotion, we commit a logical fallacy known as an appeal to emotions, or argumentum ad passiones. The logical argument can be written as follows. Company A makes me feel good, therefore, it's a good company to invest in. This type of fallacious reasoning is common in politics. This is exactly how politicians get elected into office. They want to make the people feel good. They might be charming and charismatic, but they exploit your emotional appeal and take advantage of it. This is also how penny stock promoters get you to buy their worthless stock. In behavioral finance, it is ill-advised to rely on conventional financial models such as CAPM, capital asset pricing management, or the efficient market hypothesis, which are substantiated by the underlying assumption that investors and traders behave rationally. These quote-unquote logical models are not applicable to a market such as penny stocks, which are governed by irrational and emotional investors and traders. One of my greatest advantages, especially in penny stocks, is that I understand human behaviors and crowd psychology, and I apply my knowledge and ask myself, how are other penny stock traders trading? I know they trade on emotions, and I'm just using my knowledge to capitalize on them. Since I know most penny stock traders react and place transactions based on emotions, I ask myself, what type of emotions are they experiencing right now? How are they feeling? How are they reacting? And why are they reacting that way? You should always be aware of your emotions, as well as the emotions of others. This can immensely benefit you. As the saying goes, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Rather than reacting emotionally, try thinking logically. One of the greatest qualities that has commissioned us to sustain life is fear. Fear has been used as a survival mechanism for millions of years. However, it's a loathsome emotion that creates stress, anxiety, and can overload our sympathetic nervous system, which can trigger high blood pressure, and this can lead to heart attacks, strokes, and other malignant health conditions. Fear is also a great way of controlling the masses. Terrorists use fear to terrorize. Media loves to instill fear. This tends to attract more viewers, which generates more ad revenue. And politicians use fear. Don't vote for this guy because he will, destroy the moral fabric of our society. And religions use fear. Fear our God or suffer his wrath. If you reject him and sin, you will be sent to a fiery realm and burn for all eternity. Buried deep within the brain structure is a massive nuclei called the amygdala. It serves as the groundwork for emotional conditioning. According to neuroscientists, the amygdala is where the emotion of fear is derived from. While it is true that fear has helped us survive, fear also causes us to panic, which inhibits our ability to think rationally. It makes us do pretty stupid things at times. It's difficult to solve a problem when we're overwhelmed with fear. In movies, when someone is in fear of their life and they need to quickly find a way to survive, they always pause and ask themselves to stop and think. The point I'm trying to make is that despite the role of fear as a survival mechanism, its role in our modern society, especially in the stock market, is counterproductive. It's detrimental to our survival in the world of finance. Maybe at one point in time, fear helped us survive, but that was during our hunter-gatherer days in the wild. Today, with our social cultivation being founded on a more civilized level, fear plays a little role in our survival within a refined nation. When you're confronted with a situation that elicits fear, thinking rationally can produce much more efficient results. So as stock markets being built on a more complex level, it's necessary to use other abilities that don't require fear as a form of survival. Instead, more complex features such as logic, reason, and analytical skills is really what helps us survive in the stock market, not emotions, and definitely not fear. The problem is that many of us have used fear to make our financial decisions in the stock market, and so by understanding how and when people react to fear can save us a lot of money. When we talk about greed, many people envision rich capitalist pigs on Wall Street hoarding their bank accounts with troves of cash that was generated by their compulsive desire for more. This type of mindset is a gross misrepresentation of capitalism that is fueled by ignorance. To clarify this straw man argument, we first need to define the term greed. Greed is defined as an excess desire to acquire or possess more than what one needs or deserves. These same people who make these claims also say that people who are wealthy and make millions are also selfish. In order to refute this fallacious claim, we need to define selfishness. Selfishness is the act of caring for oneself regardless of the needs of others. Bill Gates is undoubtedly one of the richest people in the world, but does that make him greedy? Does that also make him selfish? Because he has one of the largest charitable funds in the world, where he has donated billions. While it may be true that some rich people are greedy and selfish, but I know people who are low income and are also greedy and selfish. It's a trait that spans across all humans, not just the wealthy, and the reason for this is because humans are greedy and selfish by nature. Greed has been observed in many other species, which negates its exclusivity to humans. If we observe the behaviors of infants and newborns, we can learn a lot about our natural instincts. I chose infants because they have not yet been taught how to properly behave in society because they may be too young to understand or speak. They are purely driven by their natural desires. One example is when you take an object away from a child, they begin to cry. They understand possession and selfishness, but they don't understand the concept of sharing or giving. As they get older, children go through a stage of development where their selfish predispositions become highlighted as they utter the words, "It's mine." In humans, sharing is a learned behavior. We teach our kids to share because we are trying to unlearn or recondition the brain to eradicate the greedy and selfish attributes that nature has given us. Nobody taught kids to be greedy or selfish. It's parents that teach their kids not to be greedy or selfish. And if you've ever brought a kid to a candy store, they seem to want every damn item in the store. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that greed is inherently fused into our DNA. From a naturalist perspective, greed makes sense given that if one stores an excess supply of food, when climates become more unbearable, such as during the winter, then your chances of surviving increases, which implies you have a greater chance of reproducing. Natural selection does not favor the most compassionate or most giving. In a social Darwinian sense, it's not survival of the friendliest, but survival of the fittest. So understanding that greed is a natural emotion, and since penny stock traders are driven by emotions, we tend to see it profusely in penny stocks. Greed is an excess desire, and when greed is provoked in the stock market, it creates an excess demand for a stock, and we know that based on the laws of supply and demand, which you can watch in my first video, when there is an excess of demand, supply shrinks and prices rise dramatically. Bill Gates got to where he is today not by following greed or selfishness, but by following his own personal self-interests. This is where anti-capitalists fail to understand because they lack a clear distinction between greed, selfishness, and self-interest. Self-interest, in simplest terms, means that we act upon our own personal conduct to satisfy and benefit others. In economics, we learn that when we act in self-interest, this comes as an expense that benefits others. And this is achieved through the facilitation of what Adam Smith described as the invisible hand. Practically every decision we make, from the type of foods we eat, from the time that we decide to go to bed, are all motivated by our self-interests. For instance, when I brush my teeth, I benefit myself by preventing cavities from forming and keeping my teeth healthy, which benefits others because they don't like to smell bad breath. In business, when I am propelled by self-interest, I have an expectation that I will earn a profit, and my desire for a profit consequentially benefits those who buy my product or service that I am selling. This erroneous argument that capitalism is governed by greed is a strawman fallacy. Capitalism, as well as the stock market, is not driven by greed, but by self-interest, which should make a clear distinction between selfishness and greed. Does that mean selfishness and greed do not exist in the markets? Well, absolutely not. Both qualities exist in the stock market, but they are not caused by greed or selfishness, nor are they the result. When greed does occur in the markets, the residual effect is irrational exuberance, excessive rise in prices which create climax patterns. When I look at stock charts for penny stock companies, I don't just see lines and price fluctuations, I see psychology. The most suitable way to demonstrate this claim is through the dot-com bubble. Around the late 1990s, many stock prices were soaring, especially stocks listed on the NASDAQ. Remember, many companies on the NASDAQ are tech companies, and back then the internet was really starting to gain recognition. And it should be quite obvious that the one segment of the tech industry in particular that was flourishing were the dot-com businesses. Companies like Pets.com, Boo.com, and eToys.com were all successful failures during this era. Many of these companies attributed to this large spike. And just based on my observations, I can tell you that there are two very distinct emotions involved in this chart, and they are fear and greed. And I personally like to call this pattern a climax. So throughout my series, when I refer to a climax pattern, it should represent a similar pattern to the dot-com bubble as you see here. Okay, so this upward trend, which spans from about 1998 until the year 2000, indicates there was substantial buying during this period. A lot of early buyers, as well as private investors, such as venture capitalists, acquired dot-com stocks around the late 1990s, and many held their positions over time. As more and more investors and traders began to realize the potential to become wealthy in the stock market by investing in dot-coms, they too wanted a piece of the pie. Their irrational behaviors contributed to this massive spike. They saw others making millions, which elicited this bandwagon effect whereby traders jump on the bandwagon to make more money like everyone else. The everyone is doing it, so I should do it too mentality. They fail to understand the technical and fundamental aspects of equities. Remember, stocks are affected by the laws of supply and demand. So with all this excessive buying, this increased demand, which inflated the price of the stock to a point that was beyond any rational price level, which we can clearly see on this chart. It was a period when you can buy almost any tech stock or dot-com startup and never be wrong because the stocks continued to climb higher and higher, thus generating more profits for everyone. The problem is that greed interfered with their sense of rational perspective. Did they honestly think the stock would continue to climb forever? There's an old idiom that describes this perfectly. All good things must come to an end. Not only was greed a contributing factor, but they were also consumed by their ignorance. They did not understand why it occurred or when it was going to burst, or if it was going to burst at all. But when we begin to analyze stock patterns later in this series, the dynamics behind this should make a lot more sense to you. Not to mention the supply and demand that I had discussed in the first video. This downward slope, the bearish trend, indicates massive selling. When I see a decline such as this, all I see is emotion, and that emotion is fear. As many late buyers around, I'd say, the midsection to upper region, held the stock, thinking it was going to go higher, they began to panic as they saw the price quickly declining. Many of the early buyers and large buyers down at the bottom started to sell their positions. So demand was decreasing as the supply of stocks was increasing, and as traders and investors became aware of what was going on, this triggered massive selling. So the people who really lost money were the late buyers and the ones who held, thinking the stocks were going to rebound, which they didn't. One of the few remaining stocks that survived this catastrophe was Amazon.com. Just to give you an example of how much money could have been made during the dot-com boom if I had invested $5,000 in Amazon stock in late 1997, well, 2 years later, I would have made over $100,000, accounting for more than a 2,000% gain on my investment. However, the stock price went from about $107 per share in December of 1999 and plummeted to a low of just about $6 per share about 2 years later. So many people who bought late and held on to the stock lost almost everything. And those that bought early and held made almost nothing. The smart ones, however, bought early and sold perfectly. And this same manifestation that I just described to you is how a lot of smart penny stock traders make money, and how a lot of ignorant traders lose money quickly. So what had really initiated the climax during the dot-com era was simply humans just being humans. We succumbed to our own natural tendencies to be greedy and fearful. Many inexperienced stock traders and investors will try to make the argument that it's impossible to know when the stocks are going to collapse. But the truth is, it's possible. You just need to know how it works. In an upcoming video, I explain how to determine when to buy and sell when you see these climaxes like this in the stock market, specifically penny stocks. I want you to be familiar with these climax patterns because you will encounter them as they are prevalent throughout penny stocks, especially in the OTC markets. Just as many people became wealthy during the dot-com era, we relive that experience in the world of penny stocks on a frequent basis. So, if you want to make money quickly, you need to find these climax stocks. Many stocks that replicate the behaviors seen in the dot-com era are being suspended by the SEC, so you won't see as many climax patterns as there used to be, but they still exist, and will continue to exist. What many fraudulent stock promoters do is they buy a lot of shares of stock for a particular penny stock company, and then create a lot of hype for that stock so everyone buys, and this buying opportunity creates a lot of demand, which we should know by watching the first video of the series, that when there's a lot of demand, this will inflate the price of the stock just as we have seen in history. The dot-com boom and bust is a perfect example. This is how a lot of amateur penny stock traders get rich, is by piggybacking off of these climax stocks if you can get in early, just as many did during the dot-com boom. Many penny stock traders and investors, as well as professional investors and portfolio managers, they all fail to realize that many penny stock companies operate in much the same manner, just as we witnessed in the year 2000 with the dot-com era. Now there is a general rule of thumb, and that is, when stocks rise too high too fast, they have the tendency to crash. Not 100% of the time, but much more often than not. Irrational exuberance was a term coined by the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Alan Greenspan, during a televised speech back in 1996. It was inferred that irrational exuberance was an implicit warning to the financial community that stock prices were overvalued, yet many were not attentive to his warning until it was too late. I brought this to your attention because I wanted to focus on one word: irrational. Now, based on my observation, this irrational behavior in the stock market was also caused by the introduction to electronic trading. Day trading was once reserved exclusively for professionals and employees working for institutional or investment firms. It wasn't until the onset of technology and the internet during the late 90s when day trading became accessible to retail traders like you and I. Newer ECNs had emerged, and this helped establish discount brokerage firms, which allowed smaller investors to invest and place trades in the stock market due to lower commission fees. Not to mention the fact that people could buy and sell stock on their personal computer right from their own home. Prior to the internet, most trades were placed over the telephone, as I'm sure you've seen in movies preceding the technological epoch. What this did was that it dramatically increased volume in the stock market, and ultimately this opened the door to a lot of inexperienced traders and investors. And that inexperience propagated irrational exuberance. Today, however, we rarely see this kind of market activity in blue chip stocks and other stocks traded on the Nasdaq. And this also constitutes evidentiary support as to why we see this kind of market activity in penny stocks and OTC markets. The reason being is that many penny stock traders are inexperienced and trade on emotions. This was how I made tens of thousands of dollars in 2014 by acquiring a marijuana penny stock early and sold at the perfect time. And I've personally seen penny stock traders make well over $100,000 on a single trade by buying and selling a stock that mimicked the behaviors of a Climax pattern. The digital currency known as Bitcoin is another prime example of a Climax pattern. The inherent failure of Bitcoin can be exemplified in late 2013. But the downturn was more of a gradual tapered effect rather than the conventional free fall in a climax pattern. During its initial stages, a massive climax pattern will emerge, and after the collapse, it will slowly begin to build momentum as investors and traders regain their confidence. Usually after a large climax pattern, it can act as a learning experience, and a very painful one at that. It's almost like a cheating wife that betrayed her lover. It may take years to regain that trust, and many aren't able to ever trust that individual again, just like many people have done in the past after the dot-com bubble had burst and the crash of Bitcoin. I personally like the idea of a cryptocurrency, but people need to understand the dynamics behind irrational behaviors in the financial markets. Prior to 2013, the price of Bitcoin rose too high too fast, resulting in a massive crash. And it's highly probable that an individual or small group of individuals held a large portion of Bitcoin in the beginning and held on to their positions. When they sold their portion, this caused a massive increase in supply, which decreased the asset price of Bitcoin due to a lack of demand. Many Bitcoin users panicked, many lost a lot of money, and chaos ensued. It was the dot-com era all over again. The ultimate cause of these recurring climax patterns is human nature at its finest. I remember near the end of 2013, I was warning people on the internet, as well as colleagues from school who invested in Bitcoin, that it was going to crash within the next few months based on the same psychological patterns, and I even gave a specific dollar amount it would crash to. I felt like some kind of crazed evangelist warning people the world was going to end soon. Nobody believed me, and many had ridiculed and mocked me. The naive Bitcoin community had flagged my messages as spam, and I received numerous downvotes when I'd posted messages online warning people about the impending crash. It's common courtesy to refrain from laughing at someone else's misfortunes in the financial market. But when it seems like everyone is against you, it's hard not to feel good after you realize you've been right all along and everybody else that didn't listen, well. But hey, that's part of the game. If you don't want to lose money, then don't play. It's that simple. Not only did I predict that Bitcoin would crash, but I also predicted the price level that Bitcoin would fall to based on my strategies, which I teach in the 5th video of this series. In fact, the price of Bitcoin went lower than I had anticipated, leaving thousands of Bitcoin users in shambles. And I mention all of this to you because the same patterns that transpired during the crash of Bitcoin is the same exact patterns found in many penny stocks on the OTC market. That's why when I explain this to you, you can apply this knowledge to your penny stocks. Love makes us do crazy things sometimes. It's such a powerful emotion that can easily overshadow the boundaries of logic and reason. Some people are willing to quit their job, leave their friends and family behind, and move across the entire country simply because they are in love with someone who wants to live somewhere else. Others are willing to offer their own life for someone else that they truly love. Well, I find this to be highly irrational. I don't think it would be reasonable to end your life for someone else's unless the benefits of your death far outweighs the cost of your life. For example, if you held the key to an incredible disease that could potentially save millions of people, but the only way to obtain the cure was for you to die, I think it would be rational to give your life in exchange for saving millions of other lives, and then those lives could lead to more generations to come. But when you're driven purely by emotions such as love, that can distort our sense of reality. That's when problems arise. Many do not understand that love itself is actually a chemical produced in the brain. This chemical is a neurohypophysial hormone known as oxytocin, not to be confused with the painkiller Oxycontin. Oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus and transferred by secretion to the posterior pituitary gland. Because of this chemical's properties, it is sometimes referred to as the love hormone. People tend to bond and trust each other once the hormone is emitted. Again, love can make us do things which are extremely irrational. A woman may fall in love with a man who is just using her to get in bed with her. She fails to perceive his obscured actions because she's so blinded by her emotions. The power of love. And with that same example, we too become subject to this blinded love syndrome in the stock market. The act of love should render some appreciation for stocks, but it doesn't. The reason is this. It's been said you should never marry a stock, meaning if you buy and hold on to the stock, you should never disregard certain factors that negatively influence the price of the stock. So if the stock begins to decline because the company is issuing horrible financials quarter after quarter and you have no intention to sell, you are headed for disaster because you are, as they say, married to the stock. This is why you need to be adaptive to the markets. Just as Herbert Spencer once famously said, it's survival of the fittest. Market sentiment changes, so you too need to change your strategical approach to correspond with the flow of the market or individual stocks. The financial markets is a dog-eat-dog world. If you do not adapt, it will eat you alive. If anything, penny stocks should be treated more like a one-night stand or a short-term relationship rather than a marriage. As a trader, you should be focusing primarily on the technical side of stocks, or what are the stock charts indicating, not by yielding to your emotional desires. This just leaves you to become emotionally compromised, which is one of the reasons why we see such volatility and irrationality in the markets, especially in the short term. Since we're on the subject of love, I've heard stories about people who love Starbucks coffee, so they end up buying Starbucks stock. This is such a foolish way of investing your money. Sometimes amateurs will buy a penny stock based on a quote-unquote gut feeling, whatever that is. It's also an imprudent way to make your financial decision. You should always have a rational objective that explains why you are buying or selling a stock. If you cannot give a rational explanation, then you should not be buying or selling a stock. It's all about analytics. There are companies out there that I don't like, but does that mean I shouldn't buy their stock as well? No, of course not. If the stock is performing well, or I anticipate that it will perform well in the coming days or weeks, I'm going to buy the stock even if I despise the company. Again, I only care about the analytics. Having my prejudices or biases interfere with my decisions to buy company stock is an irrational decision. Let's say a penny stock company recently offered shares on the OTC market. It's a gay bridal company, and maybe you don't like gays and oppose civil unions and gay marriage. Well, let's say this penny stock company jumps by 300% within the next couple of weeks, and you don't buy it because of your conflicting beliefs. You just missed an opportunity to make hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. In the stock market, it's survival of the smartest. Information, knowledge, and intelligence equal success, not personal feelings and opinions. Save that for politics. I personally don't have too many issues struggling with greed and fear like most people in the stock market. My weakness is anger. Sometimes when we trade and we lose money, we get very frustrated, and this frustration can cause us to react without being rational. And that's exactly what happened to me when I first started trading. I was holding a position and I had to go to school, the university, so I had to set up an alert on my smartphone that would notify me when the stock dropped to a certain point, and I was going to sell if I received the alert on my phone. Well, I made the mistake of playing my music too loud in the car, and I didn't hear the alert and lost several $100s because of that stupid mistake, and I paid the price. But it didn't end there. I became so irate that I told myself that I would only need to gain a few percentage points to earn back that money if I leveraged my account by 300% on margin, which is absolutely insane, but I was angry. The next morning, the stock plummeted and I lost all of my money in my account, which was about $10,000, and that's a lot for a student earning minimum wage. But you know what? I didn't give up because I knew I was good at making money in penny stocks. I just made a costly mistake. And this costly mistake is what we refer to as revenge trading. You tend to place trades when you're losing to try and make your money back, and it's usually influenced by anger or revenge. This type of trading must be avoided at all costs. I've seen this happen to gamblers who are on a losing streak, so they get frustrated and do something irrational like going all in or placing a ridiculous amount of money on a bad bet, in which they lose a large position of their money. Sometimes when we're in a losing streak, things usually don't get any better because we become agitated and cannot think properly. This is when you need to take a break from trading penny stocks. It's a high-stress industry, but when you can overcome some of the emotional barriers, the rewards will outweigh the losses. Remember to never base decisions on emotions. And anger is one emotion that I find to be almost completely useless, especially in the stock market. Depending on the type of person you are, as you begin to acquire more knowledge in the stock market and consistently win trades, there is a possibility you might become a little conceited. The stock market is full of arrogant, cocky pricks. And I'll let you in on a little secret. No matter how good you are, or think you are, the stock market will always find a way to humble you. Trust me, I've been there. Don't let your ego dictate your trading strategies. If you're in a losing position, it might hurt your ego if you accept the losing position, but sometimes you have to in order to prevent losing even more money. There are also times when I'm on a winning streak and I've won over 10 trades in a row, and that's when I sometimes become overconfident and prideful. The very next trade, I lose all my money I just gained in the previous 10 trades. This is usually the result of breaking my own rules by becoming too comfortable and confident that I neglect risk aversion and become more aggressive. Big mistake. If your strategies were working for you in the past, continue to use them. I'm not sure if boredom qualifies as an emotion, but I'm going to include it anyway since it's more of a lack of emotional or physiological stimulus. Boredom in the stock market does occur, especially among day traders. Day traders get into the habit of constantly buying and selling stocks, and there will be days when you miss an opportunity or nothing is really moving. Don't let this discourage you or have any impact on you. I say this because some traders, out of pure boredom, will decide to buy a stock. I'll admit there are days when there is infrequent market activity, so penny stocks aren't as volatile. Never buy out of boredom. One thing boredom teaches you is to be patient, and that is something you need to learn as well in the stock market. For me, I see boredom as an indication that I need to take the day off and not trade at all. Or rather than watching stock charts, I just research penny stocks by browsing penny stock forums or scanning news feeds, which will be discussed in more detail in the next video. We live in a society where we tend to strive towards happiness. We like things that make us feel good. As Freud would probably describe it, we are inhabitants confined to the immediate gratifications of the pleasure principle, the driving force behind the id. Even in the Declaration of Independence, first drafted by Thomas Jefferson, it states that we have the inherent right to preservation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, happiness itself is another one of those ambiguous terms that lack any formal meaning. It's a term that imputes subjectivity rather than objectivity, meaning people assign their own interpretation to define what happiness is. For example, some claim to find happiness in financial prosperity. Now, others may disagree. And many people like to give money away to help others in need. Funding your child's college education, giving money to those living in poverty. But how are you going to give money if you don't have money to give? Some find happiness in hunting and killing animals. A lot of people find this conduct to be cruel and inhumane. There are also men and women who find happiness in molesting young boys. That's what makes them happy. Most people object to this kind of behavior, so just because you don't find happiness in something does not mean it doesn't provide happiness to someone else. So to say happiness is definitive, it's actually quite the opposite. We all have our own interpretation of what makes us happy. But I'm not here to discuss what makes us happy, but rather the ramifications of happiness when we do experience it. For the sake of this video, we propose that happiness is a psychological state of mind that elicits a pleasurable emotion such as contentment or satisfaction. But we can agree that we experience happiness in the stock market when we are making money. We wouldn't say that if I buy a stock and suddenly I lose 50% of everything I invested, it would make me happy, right? The problem is that happiness in the stock market can lead to something called euphoria. Euphoria is when our happiness becomes more intensified. And this actually clouds any form of rational judgment, and we begin to engage in these euphoric fantasies. Traders falsely believe that the price of the stock will continue to rise as they watch their account sizes grow, only to lose money in an instant as the stock crashes. Casinos and lotteries take advantage of this phenomenon by rewarding players with small payouts to make it appear as if they are winning something, when in reality they are losing in the long term. If casinos and lotteries made it impossible to win anything at all, nobody would play. This is how manipulative stock promoters inflate the price of the stock, just as we had mentioned earlier. They take advantage of euphoria by attracting gullible penny stock traders to buy specific stock, and as more people buy, this increases demand, which increases the price of the stock. That's when early buyers cash out and start selling their large position sizes, and this causes the stock price to drop, and the gullible penny stock traders panic as they see their euphoric fantasies quickly fading away. This is why happiness can be irrational. It's usually followed by euphoria and greed. We may experience moments of perpetuating bliss, but you should always remember to curtail your emotions and to stick to the analytics. Don't succumb to your emotions. And the first step to the solution is by being aware of your emotions. Emotions themselves are not irrational. It's our behaviors that are irrational. Emotions are irrational. A meaning without, rationality. Each segment of the brain serves its own functions. Emotions are within the limbic system, while reasoning takes place in the neocortex. So it makes sense that our emotions are not rational because they are not one and the same thing. Just as your hand is not your foot, but they are both part of the body. If you traded stocks before, one of the worst feelings you get is when you lose money. The only thing that's worse than that is when it consists of losing lots of money. One of the primary reasons why we feel this way has to do with attachment. Now, I've studied numerous religions over the years, everything from Asatru to Zoroastrianism. I don't consider myself religious by any means, but there is one concept that I admire, and it derives from an ancient Eastern religion that predates Christianity by several hundred years. This Eastern philosophy that can be applied to financial markets are called the Four Noble Truths. They are provisions to Buddhism and can be summarized as follows. Life is full of suffering, and suffering is due to desires and attachments. Suffering can be eliminated by eliminating desires and attachments. Suffering in this context is identified as depression, anger, anxiety, stress, and other undesirable emotions. It should be noted that suffering is caused by an unquenchable craving, or more simply, attachment. For example, if you have a favorite shirt and you accidentally stain the shirt, how do you think you're going to react? You're probably going to be very upset. Why? Because you have a personal attachment to this material object. To put this into perspective, let's assume that if you were wearing a regular plain t-shirt that holds no significant value to you and you accidentally stain it, you're not going to feel the same emotions associated with your favorite shirt because you don't have an attachment to this plain t-shirt. I could give countless examples using this type of philosophy. This is actually one of the reasons why people become depressed, angry, jealous, sad, and any other negative emotion you can think of. It's because we've set some form of desired expectation that we become attached to, and when these expectations aren't met, we begin to experience these undesirable emotions. Now, the reason why I bring this to your attention is because it involves a concept that I've properly labeled as passive capital. Passive capital is money that you are willing to lose in the event that your investment incurs a loss. So in other words, if you're willing to risk your money in penny stocks, don't use your life savings. You want to use money that you have very little attachment to because it's easier to lose money that doesn't hold much importance to you than if you were to have lost, say, your 401k or life savings. This is why it's easier to trade with other people's money like hedge funds do, because it's not your capital, and therefore you aren't emotionally attached to it as if you were using your own money. And if you lose that capital, it doesn't bear a financial loss to you, just to those who lent you the money. This is also why I think that government and politicians foolishly spend your tax dollars because they don't really care what happens to your money because it's not theirs. And this is why I believe that the private sector is much more efficient than the public sector because the private sector cares about, efficiency and making a profit. Whereas public sector, they don't care about sustaining a profit or maximizing efficiency as they would in a private sector because they're not using their money. As a business, they tend to use their own money and their own retained earnings. In the stock market, when we lose money, it can be one of the worst feelings. But it doesn't have to be. The reason why is because we are attached to money, just as we are attached to our favorite shirt. A lot of times, if we get angry at something, it's usually because we have some sort of a desire. We have a desire for something to be a certain way, but when it doesn't happen, we get angry. That's why other religions like Zen Buddhism focuses on letting go of these attachments and these desires. When you amass all of these desires, you're like a rock in a stream where the flow of water represents the flow of life. and it will flow around this stubborn rock. You won't get anywhere in life if you act like the stubborn rock who is unwilling to let go of your attachments. You need to learn how to let the flow of the stream carry you through like a leaf floating through the water. You need to be the leaf and not the rock. That's why you should start trading with passive capital. It's money that you can afford to lose without the underlying partnership of attachment. Over the years, I've witnessed an interesting phenomenon among both inexperienced and experienced penny stock traders. Their actions tend to emulate the behaviors of a gambler. These penny stock traders commit what's called the gambler's fallacy. This fallacy occurs among stock traders from all market caps, but principally I've noticed it to be very pervasive among penny stock traders. Maybe this is due to the fact that penny stock traders tend to advocate risk, and therefore exhibit a tendency to imitate the behaviors of gamblers, rather than real traders or investors. In any event, I want you to become aware of this concept so you can recognize it to refrain from committing the gambler's fallacy. I've constructed my own argument to demonstrate the gambler's fallacy as follows. X occurs Y times in a row, therefore, X will deviate from its intended course in the next occurrence. So if something were to happen 14 times in a row, and you tell yourself it won't happen again because it just occurred 14 times in a row, you've just committed the gambler's fallacy. So to properly illustrate what this argument is inferring, we can create an analogy using the lottery. So let's assume that you play the lottery on a regular basis for a few years, and you tell yourself you're due to hit the jackpot sooner or later because you've been playing so many times without hitting the jackpot. For those of you who don't gamble, this is a legitimate allegation made by gamblers. The truth is, you can play every day until the day you die and never hit the jackpot. Now we can apply this gambler's fallacy to the stock market. So for example, if a stock price has been steadily rising over the course of several months, you say to yourself, the stock can't possibly go up any further. Well, you've just committed the gambler's fallacy because the stock may in fact continue to rise for another several months, even years in the long term. This may convince you to sell your shares early, thus hindering you from reaching the potential to truly maximize your profits. Obviously, the stock will fluctuate over the long-term duration, but despite these short-term fluctuations, it will still form an upward trend. Again, this poor form of reasoning mitigates your profits because you sold too early. Or if you were anticipating on buying the stock and decided not to buy because you thought, it was going to fall soon, once again, you've just relinquished a money-making opportunity. Now, on the contrary, let's say you purchase stock for a company, and ever since you bought the stock, the price has been falling for days, perhaps weeks, and you tell yourself, I'm not going to sell my shares. It can't continue to go down further because the price has been declining for days or weeks. It's due to go back up. Well, this too is a prime example of the gambler's fallacy because you think it's due to go back up since it's had consecutive losses. Now, the reality is, this stock can remain in a state of declination for weeks or months, or it may never even see the light of day again. And this downward trend is especially true with penny stocks. If we were to assign the variables in the argument to a real scenario, it would look something like this. X is stock price, and Y is the number of consecutive days or weeks the stock has been declining. And the conclusion that X, which is the stock price, will deviate from its intended course means that it will deviate or change from its intended course, and in this case, the intended course is to decline, in the next occurrence. So, based on this flawed logic, you intend the price of the stock to change from decreasing to increasing during the next occurrence, which will be a day or week or whatever time interval you set. Now, I would like to explicate one critical point. What if you were playing a game based on probabilities, say, flipping a coin, and the coin landed on tails 80 times out of 100 attempts? You may begin to speculate that the coin may be rigged in some fashion. When the outcome of the coin flips violates the laws of probabilities, it's not fallacious to presume that there may be some form of manipulation involved. In this example, the coin could be weighted or loaded, which is why tails appears more often than heads. The same holds true in the stock market. If a stock is rising for weeks without a single down day, that should trigger some red flags. I remember this one penny stock called Mine. The ticker symbol was MINE. And the price was escalating for 2 weeks straight without a single down day. When I see something like that, only one thing comes to mind, and that is manipulation. I did a little research and found that the influencing determinant of the stock price was being orchestrated by a group of amateurs using Twitter. Another logical fallacy that is usually associated with the gambler's fallacy is the hot hand fallacy. Let's take a look at how the argument is structured. X has occurred Y times in a row, therefore, X will not deviate from its intended course in the next occurrence. Now notice how the premise is the same as the gambler's fallacy. What's different about this argument is the conclusion. Therefore, X will not deviate from its intended course in the next occurrence. The gambler's fallacy concludes that X will deviate from its intended course in the next occurrence, and the hot hand fallacy concludes that X will not deviate from its intended course in the next occurrence. It functions in the same manner as the gambler's fallacy, except that instead of presuming an event or circumstance will change, it will just continue on its normal routine. So with the gambler's fallacy, if you keep losing the lottery without winning the jackpot, you tell yourself you're due to win. Consequently, the hot hand fallacy would say that if you keep winning, small increments in this case, you assert that you're on a hot streak and you think you might win the jackpot. Now, that's how it works. If you assume you're getting lucky, you tend to bet more or play again, but the reality is the next outcome may not be in your favor and you can lose everything you just bet. Many penny stock traders adopt this model of faulty reasoning. Here's how we can apply the hot hand fallacy to penny stocks. If a penny stock has been rising for the past few days and you think it's on a quote-unquote hot streak and it will continue to persist, many penny stock traders will increase their position size by buying more stock. Traders who buy penny stocks based solely on probabilities are doomed to fail. The hot hand fallacy describes how, on a probabilistic level, stocks don't rise forever. And on an emotional level, the stocks won't rise forever because people want cash, so they close their position, or maybe they want to close a losing position. But this implies that they will be selling their stock, so there is typically an increase in supply if there are more sellers than buyers. You can't do much with your money if it's just sitting in a stock. People have to pay bills, food to buy, drugs to smoke. Penny stocks will come back down. It's just a matter of when. I guess numbers 2 and 3 can be embedded within supply and demand, but you get the picture. The hot hand fallacy can also apply to stocks that are constantly falling. Hot hand is a bit of a misnomer here. It's probably more appropriate to call a cold hand fallacy because if a stock has been falling for consecutive days, weeks, or months, one can falsely presume that the stock will continue to fall, but then it does just the opposite and starts to rise. This is one fallacy that I find myself engaging in more often than others because, based on my experience with penny stocks, I've seen many penny stock companies that were around in 2010, 2011, and 2012 that are no longer in business today. So in a way, I've become conditioned to regard all penny stocks as being worthless. And by worthless, I mean that their stock price is inoperative. There are no shares being bought or sold on the market. Truthfully, not all penny stocks head to zero. It's just that the vast majority will. So you see, it's easy to stereotype penny stocks. I want you to familiarize yourself with these fallacies because many penny stock traders will commit them on a regular basis. Your job is to recognize them when they happen and to avoid them at all costs. The reason why these two fallacies occur is because people fail to understand the laws of probability. Now you see, you shouldn't trade or invest in a stock simply based on probabilities. You need to understand how penny stocks operate. In my upcoming tutorial, I teach you this strategy on how to analyze the stock prices without using pure probabilities or emotions. The art of interpreting stock charts is key to understanding penny stocks, not probabilities. But that doesn't mean you should refrain from using probabilities. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't rely solely on probabilities or chance. If you want to play games based on probabilities, go to a casino. This isn't gambling. When gamblers are losing, they commit the gambler's fallacy by hoping that their streak of bad luck will turn around. And when they are winning, they commit the hot hand fallacy by believing that their streak of luck will continue. I think out of all the millions of species on this planet, humans are by far the most bizarre. So the number one rule in stocks is to never trade on emotions. But this is why I love the stock market. This is why I love penny stocks. It's the only place I can capitalize on other people's irrational behaviors. Financial markets is where reason supersedes all emotions. Or as I like to think of it, the losers and the winners. The brain is a crucial aspect of trading. You have to be mentally fit if you want to attain exceptional results in penny stocks. That's why you need to take care of the brain. The brain is to stock trading as the body is to professional athletes. If you have aspirations to become the next Lance Armstrong and you weigh 350 pounds, well, you can forget about those dreams because they will disappear faster than food on a fat man's plate. The first step to taking care of your brain is by strictly observing a proper diet. Scientific evidence suggests that eating healthy can improve your cognitive abilities. Several years ago, my doctor told me I was obese, and I was shocked because I never realized it. So what did I do about it? Well, I changed my eating habits by refusing to eat fast food every few days and stopped eating processed foods. Today I eat salmon and scrambled eggs for breakfast a few times a week. I get tired of it, but my brain enjoys those omega-3 fatty acids and DHA. The second step was to improve your brain's functionality by exercising. I started to do a lot of cardio, and this helped me lose over 50 pounds in conjunction with a healthy diet. Research also shows that cardio improves the brain by giving it blood and oxygen along with other nutrients the brain needs to perform at maximum efficiency. Cardio also allows for improved learning, memory, and problem-solving skills, all of which are necessary in stock trading and investing. It also helps reduce stress, and I guarantee you will experience a lot of stress, especially in penny stocks. Now, the third step to improving your brain might seem a little trite, but it helps significantly with attention, memory, and stress, and is conducted through the power of meditation. Again, I'm not a religious person and I'm not a spiritual person, but a lot of people are under the impression that meditation is some form of prayer or talking to some god or gods. Well, it's not. Meditation is simply clearing your mind. It's like acupuncture for the brain. I learned this from Zen Buddhism, and it's called Zazen. That old saying, we only use 10% of our brains? That's actually a myth. We use about 100% of our brains. It's even active while we sleep. And this is why it's important to meditate, because our brains are constantly besieged with so many stressful activities in our life. How am I going to do on my final exam? I have a job interview next week. Barbara's getting married in a few days and I need to buy a new suit, but I don't have the money, and so on. Naturally, our brains were never intended to be overwhelmed with things like credit card debt, mortgage payments, stock market crashes, and maybe this explains why cardiovascular disease is the number one killer in most developed countries. But meditation helps us alleviate a lot of the unwarranted stress and anxiety involved with our complex lifestyles. It gives the brain some rest from all the hard work. Now, these 3 steps have worked for me, and I've seen an improvement in my life. I feel better, I trade better, and it helps me learn and remember things more vividly, and I'm sure it will do just the same for you. Some people believe that humans are special and unique in many ways. It might outwardly appear that way, but when we compare ourselves to the millions of other species that inhabit our planet, are we really? I remember when I was a kid, we used to live by a farm with a grassy field scattered with cows in the countryside. Now, passing the field, I would notice a herd of cows, and once in a great while, I would see one cow randomly start running aimlessly through the field, and the impetuous cows would immediately follow. This replicating behavior gives rise to the term herd mentality. Now, we might laugh at this behavior, but we shouldn't, because we are not much different than a herd of cows. Now, during any protest, you have crowds of individuals scattered like cows in a field. When one person starts chanting something, more people follow along, and suddenly you have an entire crowd chanting the same thing. All it took was that one individual, one leader, and the others followed like a bunch of mindless cows. Celebrities have such an influence on society, especially with the fashion industry. Many celebrities initiate trends, and others will follow because it's part of nature. This is why businesses use celebrities and musicians in advertisements, because people will simply buy because a prominent celebrity is using that product. This is also why religious leaders and politicians and dictators can become extremely corrupt because of the power they harness. They know people are like sheep and that they inherently become slaves to the tyrannical forces of nature, that is, to follow. This type of reasoning is fundamentally flawed. It introduces another logical fallacy called the bandwagon fallacy, also known as an appeal to popularity or argumentum ad populum, which can be constructed as follows. An idea or belief X is popular, therefore X is correct. It's a fallacious argument because it concludes the proposition is true because a large portion of people believe in it. If more than half of the world's population believed in the tooth fairy, that does not make it real. There are countless examples of this fallacy. One example, a music album sold X millions of copies, therefore it is the best album. Or perhaps billions of people believe in a religion, therefore that religion is the correct one. or the committee voted 5-8 in favor of a bill, therefore it is a worthy bill. Applying this reasoning to penny stocks, we can rephrase the logical argument as such. Company A is popular, therefore it is a good investment. Well, just because a company is popular does not guarantee it is a good investment. One of the most important ways to refrain from using this erroneous form of thinking is by doing your own due diligence, sometimes symbolized by other stock traders as a capital DD. This simply means that you investigate your own stock investments. The only person you should really listen to is yourself. The stock market is full of liars and manipulators, and it's hard to trust anyone other than yourself. That's why I am teaching you how to trade penny stocks so you can make your own informed decisions. And one of the ways we conduct our own due diligence is by researching penny stocks through media sources and news feeds, which we discuss in the next video. But when it comes to the stock market, there are many examples of market participants that conform to the herd mentality. Many investors and traders admire Warren Buffett, so it shouldn't come to much surprise that investors and traders try to emulate the same equity investments as Warren Buffett. They buy whatever he buys. When we make a decision simply based on an underlying assumption that the position one holds is valid because they are an authority on the subject, we fall victim to yet another logical fallacy. This time we commit the appeal to authority fallacy, which can be structured as follows. X is an authority on subject Y. X should be trusted because they are an authority on subject Y. Therefore, X is correct. Now, this reasoning is flawed because the second premise leads to circular reasoning. Simply because Buffett is a well-respected investor does not mean he is always correct. If we examine the dot-com bubble, or any climax pattern, we see that another contributing factor was due to our herd behaviors. We saw the stock prices rising, people becoming wealthier, and so we decided to buy just because everyone else was doing it. This is just another example of our irrational behavior and why you should do your own due diligence. But people like me, sometimes we can capitalize on the bandwagon fallacy because we know that people are buying into the stock and we know that they're using the herd mentality, so we buy and continue to hold our position, but we know that at some point the stock is going to crash or fall. We just find ways to capitalize on the situation. But this gives you an advantage over other traders because you know what is happening while others do not understand this concept or the fundamentals of what is driving the stock prices. As we wrap up this video, I just wanted to go over some of the essential points that we've discussed so far. The climaxes that have occurred throughout financial history are driven by hype and beliefs and faith, greed, the herd mentality, euphoria, ignorance, and lastly, fear. It should also be noted that these same emotional drivers is also what influences the price of penny stocks due to penny stock promotions. So do you see a common element? If you haven't figured it out yet, I'll tell you. They are all irrational. This is why if you want to succeed in the stock market, especially with penny stocks, you need to be rational and not irrational like the majority of penny stock traders and investors. A lot of rumors surrounding penny stocks are also incredibly absurd. But if humans are capable of believing in things like Scientology, then it doesn't surprise me at all that they are willing to believe in penny stock rumors. You need to know that many others will fall victim to penny stock rumors or misleading news and actually believe it. But just because they believe it does not mean you should too. In fact, you shouldn't believe it. Again, what you are doing is understanding that gullible penny stock traders and investors will embrace this hopium, as I like to call it, and buy stocks based on rumors. And this is your opportunity to do some due diligence and possibly buy into the rising stock price. What a lot of penny stock traders and investors don't understand is that the price doesn't continue to rise forever, and then it comes crashing down, which is how they end up losing a lot of money. In the 5th video of this series, I show you certain techniques on how to determine when the stock price is about to collapse. People prefer to choose faith over facts. Like I said before, people only believe what they want to believe. In the book of Matthew, it says all you need is faith the size of a mustard seed to move mountains. But in penny stocks, faith creates the mountains, and then they crumble away shortly after being worth nothing more than the price of a mustard seed. Well, that's it for this video, and thanks for watching. Until next time.